I mean, are we, that doesn't say 9 yet. Okay, all right. We're live. All right. It is officially 9 o'clock, so we're going to call this meeting to order with a roll call.
Sandino Thompson.
Present.
Omar Curry.
Present.
Jonathan Dodson.
Present.
Mark Crittenbrink. And Tom Wilson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, great. So the next thing on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the December 9th meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those minutes?
I motion to approve these minutes. I second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the minutes from the December 9th meeting. Is there any other questions on this item? All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries with unanimous consent. So third item on the agenda are cases withdrawn. There are none. Fourth item are continuance requests. Item 4A, BCA 15-00026. Any comments from staff?
Yes, this item has been on the agenda, I think a couple times. It was continued last from the meeting in, I think, November. But the applicant has encountered some changes with the client, and they're involved in more detailed design work at this point in time, and therefore they're not prepared to proceed today. And in fact, they've asked for a continuance for 60 days to the March 9th meeting.
I wanted to ask one question. So, and just in skimming the agenda, it looks like we're going to have a presentation, and I think these are related?
Yes, it's the same case. And so the presentation later on is for informal presentation, get feedback from the committee as they go through their design work.
Okay, great. All right, any other questions for staff? I don't really see it. Probably need to hear from the applicant. Is there thoughts on continuing this till March? I'd entertain a motion.
I motion that we continue this until March. I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion on the item? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, all opposed, nay. Any abstentions?
One abstention.
Okay, 3 ayes and 1 abstention. So motion's continued until March. All right, item number 5 is the consent docket. There are no items there. Item number 6A on cases for individual consideration is item BCA 15-00030. Staff report for that?
Yes, this item was on your agenda at the December meeting, and in fact, at that meeting, 3 of the 5 sites were approved that were associated with this case. These 2 sites are being brought back to you at this meeting as a result of a concern that was expressed by the committee at the December meeting with respect to how these 2 particular stops, the one on the westernmost part of Sheridan and the westernmost part of Reno in the Bricktown area, were going to be integrated and connected in a fashion that makes it convenient for visitors to Bricktown to access both the transit and the rail at the light rail station at Santa Fe, which is being renovated. In addition to how it's the connectivity between that and the canal itself. And therefore, the committee requested that these 2 particular sites be continued to this meeting for a presentation on those issues by the applicant.
Okay. Is the applicant present? Any questions for staff? Okay.
I'd just like to make a comment. I have a potential conflict of interest with regard to this application, so I'm not going to participate either in the discussion or in the voting.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
I'm Jesse Rush from the Maps Department. So, like he said, we were here in December. We showed you a couple of slides of the stops, 1, 2, and 22. And those were passed, and you had considerations for how stops 21 and 3 connect to the hub and also to the river. And so we asked Eric to come and give you a presentation on the hub. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry for the delay, Mr. Chairman, but Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Eric Winger, the Director of Public Works for Oklahoma City. I'm pleased to present to you today an update, at least on the intermodal hub, and hopefully give you a better context for what's occurring at the hub, and then hopefully to answer the questions that you have about the connectivity to the intermodal transit stops that are actually a part of the MAPS 3 streetcar project. So this is a presentation you may have seen. This has actually already gone before the City Council previously as an update to them. But to give you a little bit of background on the intermodal hub, this is an expansion of the existing Santa Fe depot. It's a historic rehabilitation, but it also is going to be upgrading some services for Amtrak, future retail, but ultimately it's for intermodal transit. And so with that, we've got the hub itself, we've got the connection to the modern streetcar, which is a part of the MAPS 3 project, with the opportunities for pedestrian enhancements, bus, car, streetcar, bicycle, and then again that integration between downtown and Bricktown. That's all included as a part of the project. I show this slide just to show the significance of the project. It is a $28 million project. It's funded from a multiple number of sources. There is city money that is in the project. There's a significant Tiger grant that accounts for about half of the project. The State of Oklahoma ODOT Department of Transportation is participating, as is the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments. And so when you look at the different components of the project, you can see that the terminal itself, and then of course the property acquisition, the streetscape, the construction are the bulk of the items to be improved. There are 4 phases. The first phase is the Santa Fe depot work, which is already underway, but then there's also a Gaylord Plaza, which is a component of the pedestrian connectivity to the streetcar stops, the pedestrian underpass, which will actually put a tunnel underneath the existing BNSF railroad tracks, and then the plaza work. So phases 2, 3, and 4, as I present to you today, are going to hopefully answer those questions about the connectivity. So this is phase 1, and I use this just as a component of the presentation. What you're looking at in this aerial perspective is looking to the northeast. This would be if you were standing on the Cox Convention Center site. But the project is pretty expansive. So it is a renovation of the existing building, but what you see here in the drawing is a reconfigured EK Gaylord. This EK Gaylord reconfiguration is taking it from a 6-lane to a 4-lane configuration. So it's actually narrowing the distance between the curbs, improving that pedestrian access across the street. And so that's a part of the project. You're going to see the expansion of the plaza in front of the intermodal hub. If you were to visit the Santa Fe today, you're going to see that there is some 3 or 4 feet between the back of curb and that very first step that leads into that main entry. It's not currently ADA accessible, but you're going to see with the reduction of lanes on EK Gaylord, part of the enhancement of pedestrians is moving that curb line out, creating a very much more expanded plaza in front of the building. So we're taking advantage of that, and the majority of the improvements are all on the Project 180 style. So we're looking at complete streets, we're looking at trees, we're looking at bicycle racks, we're looking at pavers, we're looking at new concrete, new street lights, and all the other things that you've seen in the downtown area. This contract was awarded back in August of 15. Cost is about $5 million, and the completion is scheduled later this fall. So now moving on to the other 3 phases. Now these are not yet under construction, but these are plans that are completed and ready to bid this spring. This creates the new entrance plazas, and so this is in plan. I know that the plans are very small on this drawing, but this is showing a lot of the improved site components. And so when we talk about moving that curb line out to the west, away from the building, we've effectively enhanced all the pedestrian access between Sheridan and Reno that's not very accessible today. This does not include a lot of improvements on the Cox Convention Center site, although there is a streetcar stop planned that's not a part of the agenda today. It's also on that west side of Gaylord. So there is a mid-block crossing opportunity that's also a part of this project. But what you're going to see is the 6 to 4-lane conversion, the mid-block, which I just mentioned, the new landscaping and amenity zones, and all of those other enhancements that are going to really provide for an improved pedestrian experience. The pedestrian underpass is something that is still pending approval. So as I show you these drawings today, we do have the concept approved, but BNSF has not yet finalized their approval of the plan, so we're waiting for that now. What this effectively will do, and if you did not know, there is a tunnel that's partly constructed under the tracks today. It's actually used to access the platform for Amtrak. So if you've ridden the Heartland Flyer, you've actually experienced walking halfway under the tracks where you go to the elevated deck. What we're hoping to do as a part of the project is actually complete that tunnel all the way through into Bricktown, and that's what you're seeing here. So on the bottom half of this drawing is the existing canal. Some of the additional enhancements are going to be, of course, a new lower plaza connection through a stairway. There's also a ramp section that makes sure that it's ADA accessible. But you now are going to have an improved connection, pedestrian only, not just through the underpasses at Reno and Sheridan, but one directly through the intermodal transit hub right into Bricktown. So if we talk today about how you're going to get to Sheridan or Reno through the Enhanced Plaza project, you're going to have an improved ADA access and experience going from the hub either to Sheridan and to Reno. You could then use the existing underpass tunnels, which are heavily used today by pedestrians, to get into and out of Bricktown. So when we show those new streetcar stops, that's the primary access. Once this is constructed, we're actually going to have this as an opportunity that without actually going onto the right-of-way of the street, you could come through this tunnel and access either one of those streetcar stops as well, that I'll show you in just a minute. This is just an elevation of what that rendering might look like. So this would show, looking back to the west, you can see downtown in the background, that tunnel being completed on the Bricktown side of the tracks. And again, we're waiting for BNSF approval. Our goal is to hopefully have this project out for bid in the spring with a completion this fall. This is a typical streetcar platform, and I think this is in your packet, and you may have had an opportunity to review this. This is no different than the other platforms that are going to be constructed in the downtown area. But to kind of give some perspective, these are being constructed behind the curb. These are being constructed at varying elevations of curb height. The streetcar itself has a different height than a bus, but we're also making sure that it's ADA accessible. So you are seeing some handrail details. You're seeing a proposed shelter, some identification signage. There is an opportunity that MAPS is studying to individualize these stops depending on the district, but the format and the size and the components of them are generally the same. So as we see this, what you're seeing on the bottom drawing with the large gray picture is the streetcar itself. In the orange or the tan colors, you're seeing some of the enhanced paving. You can then see just through the details, you can see that there's a platform that can hold a number of patrons waiting for that next bus. So this is integrated into the sidewalk seamlessly. This is just part of the pedestrian experience when you're just in Bricktown. When the streetcar is not there, you'll simply traverse across this stop. When it is there, it's set up to where you can load the streetcar at a zero entry so that there is no stepping up or stepping down into and out of the streetcar. So these are the plans of what that looks like, and to give some orientation, this is the plan sheet for the Sheridan Avenue stop. On the right-hand side of the page, near the upper right-hand corner, you're actually seeing that stop. It's in detail above the general notes component. So right under the north arrow is that stop just east of the elevated railroad tracks. What you see is the intersection improvements are at E.K. Gaylord and Sheridan on the left. And so as we integrate those sidewalks, you simply can walk down the sidewalk on the east side of Gaylord, come underneath the elevated tracks, and you'll have direct access to the stop itself. Once the pedestrian tunnel is completed, you actually have access from the Bricktown side as well. The same occurs for the Reno Avenue stop. So the intersection at the upper right-hand portion of the page is at Oklahoma and Reno. On the left side and off the page is Gaylord, but again, at the upper left-hand side, you're going to see that streetcar stop, which is located immediately east of the elevated railroad tracks. So the existing sidewalks are considered the primary access, and that's similar to what's being considered all over downtown. This stop is no different than a bus stop, other than it has some elevation changes that are ADA accessible to make sure that the car can be, again, loaded and unloaded without any stepping. This is just a few construction photos as I wrap up and prepare for any questions that you might have. This is some of the work that's underway as a part of the Phase 1 construction of the Santa Fe Depot. This is some of the future office spaces that are being remodeled and renovated as we speak. This is the future waiting room on the left, the future pedestrian underpass on the right with the tunnel only partially constructed. This is that tunnel that we would expect to be able to go forward and complete into Bricktown. This is the future tenant spaces and some of the existing light fixtures. There is a historic preservation that is a part of the building, so a lot of those elements, a lot of that original architecture are all being preserved on the interiors. This is some of the dining spaces in the main hall on the right. I know the photo on the right is a little dark, but it is a very decorated, a very architecturally detailed type space, and so it's going to be pretty remarkable once it's finished. And then this is our overall schedule. So as I mentioned, work on the project began last summer of 2015. There are 4 major phases, and they're identified in the 4 colors. You're going to see some of it is integrated with Project 180. But our next phase that's going out to bid is the Gaylord Plaza, which is Phase 2, and that's going out this spring. But Phase 3, the pedestrian underpass, and Phase 4, the Bricktown Plaza, all being a part of the project, help coordinate that pedestrian activity. So we're hoping to have the entire project finished later this year. So with that, I'm here to answer any additional questions you have about the connectivity and to hopefully respond and seek your approval today.
Questions from other committee members? I did have a few. I think we had discussed this a bit in the last meeting, and I think there were two sets of approvals. So we did have a presentation several months ago regarding the plaza into Bricktown from the Intermodal Transportation Hub. And at that point, I think we had talked, just because from a design standpoint and thinking about this committee looking at things sort of in a broad sense, one of the topics that's come up over and over again for the strength and sort of the thriving elements of Bricktown is interaction with the canal itself. And so the thing that I was at least curious about, I think maybe others on the committee as well, but I know I was curious about in talking with merchants and others along the canal, and I think one of the challenges we have is how from a design standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint, we increase that connectivity to the canal. So what I was hoping, at least just to get a better understanding of, and wanted to make sure, because I think we had two different conversations. We had the conversation in December, and then several months ago we had conversation on a presentation regarding the plaza itself, so the tunnel. And I wasn't sure, or at least at the presentation in December, wasn't sure that there was a conversation between those two parties just on, at least if we're considering, thinking about, or have ideas about how to improve that connectivity. And what raised that concern, and again, these are more so just statements and things that I'm at least trying to get better clarity on, is my understanding that the Gaylord stop, so the stop in front of Santa Fe Station for the streetcar, is, at that point, it couldn't really be spoken to a lot clearly, I think, on whether that was a phased plan, whether it was a to be determined later, or whether it was a might happen, may not. But what it was clear is that as a part of this overall package and a part of the streetcar route today, it wasn't in the plans, I guess. So that's what I was trying to get some clarity, because I think that stop probably creates better potential for pedestrian access than the stops at Sheridan and Reno, at least as it's presented now, because the stops at Sheridan and Reno, when you talk about not access to Bricktown, but access to the canal, there are difficulties that we have, and this is just kind of we had difficulties accessing the canal in general in Bricktown.
So I've gone back to this overhead view. So if you look at the left side of the image, you're going to kind of see a gray lane of traffic. That gray lane of traffic is one of the streetcar routes. That's where there would actually be new streetcar track placed into the street. Up near the top of the drawing, about where the vehicle is placed and the arrow is shown on your screen, that's the approximate location of the stop to be located on EK Gaylord. So it's almost directly across from the main entry of the intermodal hub. So not shown here is a cut through that median. This is one of the early renderings, but the final plans have a cut through that median that is a mid-block crossing. Now, part of the MAPS 3 discussion is whether or not that part of track will be used as a regular route or if it will be used for, say, a special service. So that discussion is still ongoing. The route primary is to go east down Sheridan and west along Reno with its north-south connector on the east end of Bricktown. So that is one of the service loops that's predominant. So on special events, I think that you'll see, and possibly in the future as it expands, you might see this additional loop on this gray area become a more regular route, and that's actually under discussion this month. Their meeting is next week. Okay. If we jump to the canal access, I think this rendering shows that the best. You know, once the pedestrian tunnel is completed, we're going to have a completely new access to the Bricktown Canal that doesn't exist today. So with the monumental stair that you see on the right-hand side of the drawing, there's also a ramp section, an ADA accessible section that's just off to the drawing to the right, but it is ADA accessible as well, without going to the nearest intersection, without having to come underneath the railroad tracks, and without having to come back either north or south towards the canal. You're going to have a direct access right through the hub, right to the canal. So again, those approvals for that are pending. As I mentioned, BNSF is looking at those drawings now, and since we've got to have a right of entry, that's our only item before we bid that.
Yeah, so I think, and that, I think you've kind of helped to clarify maybe some of the questions that we didn't have the right folks maybe to answer last time, but because what it seems like, I think right now today as a patron in Bricktown, accessing, I mean, the idea of accessing the canal where the stops are currently going to go in at Reno and at Sheridan, I mean, in theory, they're actually very close. But in practice, for families, people with wheelchairs or strollers, things like that, it's difficult. So when you're just thinking about how we improve that, I think the biggest shock or question or concern was if there's not going to be a streetcar stop in the near future, or maybe with regular service in front of Santa Fe Station, then we may need to continue to look at, and this is not necessarily for this committee or for this conversation, but may need to continue to look at ways to improve the access at Sheridan and at Reno for accessing the canal, because I think that's maybe just seems to be a missing factor in the conversation, or at least we wanted to make sure it was being discussed.
Okay.
I appreciate the presentation. I think on behalf of the committee, I appreciate you guys taking some extra time to explain this stuff to us. Are there any other questions for the presentation? Okay, I think so. We continue this to this month, so we need to take some action on the other two stops.
I motion that we vote to approve case 15-00030.
I second.
Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. And then any abstentions?
One abstention.
All right, great. I think that motion carries with three ayes and one abstention. Okay, next item on the agenda is 7A, other business. Item 7A is Downtown Development Framework. Staff report for that?
Yes, this is an item that the committee and all the other design commissions and committees that are affected by the DDF have seen before. You've made recommendations in the past to recommend approval of this document to the City Council and the Planning Commission, and those actions have taken place, but now we're bringing it back for formal adoption by the committee as a document that can be referenced when we're looking at projects in the Bricktown area.
Right, the resolution is for the committee to adopt it as a supplemental guideline, so it'll be formally a part of the materials we review applications against.
Is there I guess there's not a presentation set for this, or were there any sort of changes from what we had reviewed previously?
No, it was adopted as the committee originally approved it.
Okay.
Or recommended approval of it.
Right, there were no changes after the committee adopted it in the spring, or May or June.
Okay. Well, so I have a few questions just in reviewing the package. So on pages 59, 61, and, 59, 60, and 61. And you guys might not be able to answer this for me. So on page 59, when we talk about the design sub-districts, there are several whited out sections. And so I assume that those are...
those are PUDs and SPUDs, yeah.
Yes.
Including all of Lower Bricktown.
Bane of my existence, yes.
Is a PUD.
Okay, so on page 59, you have the PUDs and SPUDs, which I understand there's several in Deep Deuce there, but we do have PUDs, but I guess because they're so small, or we have SPUDs actually, but because
the only ones we have are for the signs and the Verizon antennas.
Which I guess wouldn't be represented here because they're not.
They're so
Right.
fine grained.
Okay.
Well, Lisa, which signs?
The parking lot, EMDs.
Okay.
Okay, so then on pages 60 and 61, sorry, okay, all right, I thought it was me. Okay, on pages 60 and 61, so everything's solid except, I think, specifically this area, Lower Bricktown, right? And so I guess I'm just trying to understand why we would identify the SPUDs and the PUDs in Automobile Bed Alley and Deep Deuce along with the Lower Bricktown area. But then in these, as we talk about these sub-districts and we talk about these areas, that one tends to be exclusively, or particularly, I should say, excluded. So has there been any other conversation? I know when these were first presented early on, it was one of the conversations I had asked just in a presentation meeting, not at this committee. But has there been any conversation of why that one is so particularly excluded? I get that it's a planned unit development, but so are the Automobile Alley developments, the Deep Deuce developments, but that one seems to be particularly excluded.
Are you talking about Lower Bricktown?
Yes.
Well, basically because it's a SPUD, there's any regulation that we adopted would have to be agreed to by them. And therefore, we didn't even have that conversation.
So is that not the case?
Well, yeah, I think that's just a regarding the Deep Deuce graphics, I think that's just a graphic choice. Because the whiteouts on page 59, nothing about their existing SPUDs is changing. So I think that's just a graphic choice. And Deep Deuce areas are reviewed under downtown, not Bricktown.
No, and I understand it. So
I think that's just a graphic choice.
Right.
For Lower Bricktown, that, Tom, you may know, the PUD may predate the committee.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It wasn't part of Bricktown, the original Bricktown area. There are others here who probably know more about this than I. But I think once the PUD was developed, it was done separately from Bricktown.
Right. Well,
Just to kind of try to explain, like let's say the steel yards, let's say for various zoning regulatory reasons it wasn't able to meet all of the requirements of the zoning code and they had to create a SPUD. Now, as the ordinance reads, they would keep the Bricktown design review in their requirements, but that wasn't. But on some of these that predate various portions of the ordinance, they didn't keep it.
yeah, and I actually understand. So I don't want to belabor it too much because I do realize the areas that we specifically review are sort of incorporated here. But so what I was trying to get a good understanding for is, in my concern in the document, and since we are asked our opinions on the document or asked for consent on the document. It's set, so there's obviously a tone set, regardless of whether there's a PUD there or not, that there's an expectation in West Bricktown, for instance, on page 61, about minimum lot coverage. And there's an expectation in East Bricktown. There's an expectation in Deep Deuce, and there's an expectation in Automobile Alley. So regardless, it's just this one area of all the rest of the sections that this framework is supposed to cover is specifically excluded, where you set these expectations for all the other areas. I mean, and I get what the SPUD says, but it just seems concerning, especially because it's right next to Bricktown. So with this strip, conceivably in 10 years, just create an expectation that there are, no lot coverage guidelines, no minimum height guidelines. There's no even expectation from the standpoint of this design framework, guideline, right?
The PUD for Lower Bricktown has various requirements, and design requirements, so I can forward that. I don't know if you've seen it. I can forward it to you. I don't remember, what all they are. I hear what you're saying about, what's the point of having certain guidelines on one side of the street but not the other side of the street. But there are defined boundaries to the district, and
like I say, I understand it. So I was just trying to ask that question to figure out if there were some conversations on why that one was particularly excluded. So I think from the standpoint of the downtown development framework, what I'm saying is it's a concern because Lower Bricktown's right next to Bricktown, and so that area being excluded in ways that Automobile Alley, Deep Deuce aren't. I mean, so we're setting these expectations for all these other districts.
That's because Automobile Alley and Deep Deuce are not let's take Automobile Alley. That boundary that's shown, that's just a character district designation. That's not a legally defined boundary for zoning purposes. Same with Deep Deuce is about 20 SPUDs plus say 70% of the lots are reviewed under downtown.
Yeah.
So, but deep deuce is a character boundary.
Right.
It's not a legally defined entity.
Right.
That's one of the differences on why we can't superimpose on.
And I may not be making myself clear, actually, so I'll say this one more time, and then we probably can move on. So I think what I'm saying, to use deep deuce as an example, is that if you look at those pages, so on the one page we're clear where we are identifying where there are spuds and then where there is oversight from different design review committees and things like that. So looking at deep deucing, for example. But then on those next pages where you're setting an expectation, so if I'm a developer coming into those areas, or if I'm even an investor looking to perhaps even buy property in those spuds, this downtown development framework, as a framework, I'm looking at that and saying, as a framework, these are some of the expectations I know I'm going to run into. So the same thing in Bricktown, which is what we're focused on. So then in deep deuce immediately to our north, I would expect that people at least understand that's the framework and expectation. Now to our south, we've actually said nothing. I mean, from the standpoint of what the development framework talks about, and it doesn't sort of create any expectation to the south. And that's the concern that I'm just trying to
I'm suggesting that the development expectation is set in the PUD.
Okay.
Any work in Lower Bricktown needs to be presented to urban renewal. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. I know there's a paragraph that says something like shall be reviewed by some committee, but I don't know how that works. Do you happen to remember?
Development Lower Bricktown?
Yeah.
It does not have to come to this committee, I know that.
I know, but the language says something about going to a separate entity for approval.
I'm not familiar with the language in the PUD, so.
It might be worthwhile checking into that, but I was under the impression that because that was originally created through urban renewal, that improvements there, I think recently, one of the restaurants that was done was presented to urban renewal, and I think they probably used some of the thought process that this committee and others have used in order to address the issues that you're talking about. So while it may not be what we would like it to be, I think there is a vehicle for that to be addressed.
Right. And let me be clear so we can move on in the agenda. I know that we can't do anything, and I'm not even trying to project some image that we should be. I'm merely raising the question because contextually, I mean, all these areas interact with each other. So just wanting to say when we look at this framework, I'm looking at it for Bricktown and from that eye, but I'm looking at the surrounding comments about the comments about the surrounding areas for how they would interact, and that one is just specifically excluded. In ways that to the north, where we still have PUDs, the Hill, I think the entire development, I think, was a SPUD as well. But it's not. But if you look at those pages, you still create that expectation for developers, et cetera, if you look at those other pages. That's just a comment, I think, an observation I wanted to make. And we can leave it at that.
Mr. Chairman, if it was your intent to move this forward, I would recommend approval of this item.
Yeah, let's do that.
I'd second that.
Okay, great. I think it's been moved and seconded that we approve this item. So we'll bring it to a vote. If there's no further discussion, all in favor, say aye.
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 All right, all opposed, say nay. And one abstention. Yes, I'd like to abstain. Okay, so the motion carries, item 7A. So we move on to item 8, communications. 8A are presentations. Presentation 8A1 is J.C. Witcher with ADG. Staff, you have any comments on this?
Well, this is a presentation on the item that was previously continued on this agenda to the March meeting. The applicant has informed us that they've been working with their client, and as a result of some of the parameters that they've laid out for the architect, they've required the architect to change the plans. And most significantly, what you'll notice is that the hotel is taking the bulk of the site, and that the restaurant bar facility that had been proposed originally at the corner between the two hotels is now no longer part of their proposal. I think the other thing you'll notice, and this has some bearing on the Hyatt project next door is that they've reconfigured their trash enclosure area so that it is accessed via a service drive that is coming off of Russell M. Perry. And the reason it has a bearing on the Hyatt project is because there was a condition on the approval of the Hyatt project that the trash enclosures be relocated away from Russell M. Perry. So, and that we would approve that as staff administratively. We, as staff, would more than likely, if that is the proposed revision to the Hyatt project, would more than likely bring that back to the committee rather than approving it administratively, because we're not convinced that turning it and accessing it off of service drive meets the intent that the committee had with that condition. So without any other ado, we're going ahead and turn it over to the applicant for presentation on this case.
All right, questions for the staff?
Mr. Chairman, while this is not for approval, I do have a conflict with regard to this, and I'm planning on not participating in the discussion or subsequently future meetings to vote.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, if you would.
Good morning. I'm J.C. Witcher with ADG. So to answer your earlier question, and add on to what Michael explained, our client and the Marriott brand decided that the three-story corner element that we had previously shown you and other informational presentations for this was incompatible with the direction they wanted to go with this design, and so we've redesigned the project to take a really significant element of that out. And thanks, Michael. And so it's worth bringing back to you again. So that's why we're here today and why we sought the continuance to March, so that we'd have time to develop the design sufficiently to really seek a certificate approval at that time. So we'll see how this works. So today I'm just presenting the updated design. The site plan, just to refamiliarize you with that. Now the blue border that you see is for the AC Hotel that we're speaking of today. To the north of that, along Joe Carter, is the Hyatt Hotel that has already been approved with those conditions that Michael described. Of course, in your looking at this, to the right or to the east of this site are the Steelyard Apartments. A contextual image. This is the Steelyard, the Stewart facility prior to it being demolished when it was active, to give you some idea of the context, the former use. Another context photo. This is Sheridan, at the intersection of Sheridan and Joe Carter, but looking at the northwest corner. And down Main Street, Joe Carter and Main Street intersection. This is looking right now at the back of those buildings that you just saw, and to the just off of out of the frame, to the right of the frame, is the parking lot for the police substation. The Country Suites, that is catty corner, or on the southwest corner of that intersection. And then this is an image from the Steelyard project, the apartments that will be immediately to the east of this AC Hotel. To the left of this image, that corner of the Steelyard Apartments will be the closest adjacent part of the apartment building to our AC Hotel. Just noting that the materials used here are brick and a wrought iron or a metal balcony fence. We understand that this will be hardy panel in these areas, so pretty typical elements to what we've been doing in Bricktown. The Criterion, just southeast of our site, and then a site plan of the redesigned portion. So I'll note right now the private drive that's on the north edge of the site. This is property that will be owned by the Steelyard Development, but through agreement with the adjacent property owner, we will have access to get back to this element back here. Transformers are back here, and then a small, but nevertheless a service drive. We've got our drop-off for the AC here on Sheridan, and then we'll talk more about this service court. Michael mentioned the dumpster, this trash service, and that's where that happens. Getting in a little deeper, a little closer, you can see the elements of the site, and we have rotated the dumpster enclosures to be looking in on this service courtyard, and those have their own gates. And then right here, we'll see in a bit, we'll have some discussion about gates that screen that service courtyard altogether, just so that you know what's going on inside the building. We have the, if you will, the public functions, the amenity functions of the hotel out here to the street, a lot of glass, a lot of visual activity out on the street on this first level. The back of house functions are towards that back of house of the courtyard, so that we maximize the excitement and the visual activity, both for the benefit of the hotel, but also for Bricktown, the experience of being in Bricktown. As we move up, this is the second floor. The significant element of this is a two-story clear space, a two-story volume here at this entry area, the lobby, with a bridge that connects the two portions of the second floor. Then the third through fifth floor is guest rooms. So the image here, this corner image, you can see, if you remember the previous, or what's shown in your packet, I think had the previous documents with the three-story. This has, we've eliminated that three-story restaurant and bar and have guest rooms right out to the corner and put a strong element there at the intersection. The AC aesthetic is probably the simplest way, is a contemporary Italian design aesthetic, is kind of the genesis of the AC brand aesthetic. And so blending that, it's kind of a challenge to blend that with a Bricktown aesthetic and pull that into a construction cost that's appropriate. But we feel like we've done a good job with that. I'm going to ask Scott to come up in a moment and talk about some of these materials that we're using, but you can see the brick and metal panel that you've seen on this for this project before, but used in a little bit different way, a little bit cleaner and more refined way. There's some other images, the entry. Closer up. And then getting to that Joe Carter elevation and this service courtyard. So I understand that, I wasn't at this meeting, but I understand that in Scott meeting with staff that there was some discussion about, especially because this screening element plays a prominent role. It's essentially a focal point as you're eastbound on Main Street. It's kind of the terminus, what you see as you're traveling down there, as well as being a significant element for pedestrians that are going back and forth. We think we've done a really effective job of screening the operational things that go on in a service courtyard. But the discussion, I think, that I'm going to ask Scott to develop a little bit more is about what do we do with that screening element, these sliding gates that close off this service courtyard from the street. Scott, would you come up and talk about that?
So a week or two ago, I met with Lisa and Michael, and we kind of had some discussion about this. Functionally, this is the location that works for the hotels. So, I mean, this, without having to transport trash across the courtyard or around the street and to the back, this is really the place the dumpsters need to go. need to go. The other issue is we really only have 2 streets to work from. We've got Sheridan and we've got Joe Carter. The service drive is a private drive. I mean, it's owned by the steel yard. We've been granted some limited access to that, but that's with the current owner. If that property were to sell at some point, the hotels may not have access to that drive any longer. So that's a risk of using that. So we feel like we've provided a good solution here. We're providing some sliding gates. We're screening that area. One of the things we talked about was maybe making these sliding gates something more than just sliding gates. And we've looked at some examples of some things that we might be able to do in creating some type of, I guess you could call it a piece of public art on these sliding gates, so that it does give some entrance as we're coming down Main Street and we're able to see that on these gates. We haven't arrived at a final design of that, of course, but that's something that I think we would be willing to work on, and I think that could be a really interesting item. We are using kind of that courtyard area as a transition between the 2 buildings. They're different colored bricks on the 2 buildings. So it's not just, let me go back. Let's see. A good rendering. So you can see that the Hyatt is a little different color than the brick on the AC, and so we're using this as a transition area between the 2 hotels as well. So this would more than likely be a cast stone or a CSMU material that would be similar to both and be seen in both, but be a transition between the 2. The other materials on the AC, we are using 2 colors of brick, 2 shades of brick, so we're creating kind of this window frame design to develop this element with a lighter color brick inside, metal panel, sort of spandrel vertically in this case between the windows, and then similarly the lighter shade of brick and the darker shade of brick used in this area with the metal spandrel panel used horizontally in this to create more pattern in the facade. And what we're trying to do, the attempt is to get some Bricktown appearance by recessing one plane of brick and projecting another plane of brick to create frames that are reminiscent of some of the warehouse structures. Then quite a bit of use of metal panel as well, and that kind of harkens back to the steel yard, the metal buildings, things like that in this area. Again, JC mentioned the amount of glass. I think that's one of the key things on this project is we've got the bar, the restaurant, the lobby, the conference center, all facing onto Sheridan, all full-height floor-to-ceiling glass looking into those spaces. So we'll be able to see a lot of activity from the hotel to the street. So again, this is kind of an informational, or this is an informational presentation we're making today. And we would love to get your feedback. The dumpster issue is kind of key to the Hyatt project and getting our final approval on that. So I don't know how we go about that, Michael, but I guess we do need some kind of an approval on whether that's a satisfactory solution or not.
I have one just question to clarify. So, because I think we talked about the Hyatt as well, but the Hyatt, we've not approved either of these hotel designs. Is that right, or did we approve the Hyatt?
The Hyatt was approved in November.
It was okay. So it was the AC that was.
Yeah.
That's in question.
AC was continued for a number of reasons, basically based on the client's concerns about the configuration of the restaurant bar at the corner.
Okay. All right. Okay. Are there questions on the presentation from staff, from the presenter, I should say, committee?
I've got a couple of comments. The location of that sliding gate, is that still pretty much direct access to Main Street?
Pretty close.
It's still in the same location, basically, right?
Essentially. I mean, it may have moved a few feet one way or the other, but let's get back to the site plan here.
I like that. I like your idea of looking at a different material, more solids into that gate, because
Right.
it is a direct access. And also just walking through that, I'm not sure how, the smell and everything walking by that area that close to the street
Right.
And the sidewalk would affect everything. I don't know if you've addressed some of the materials. That the major corner element, is that metal panels?
That is metal panel, yes.
What about the dark areas, the gray areas in between the floors?
That is, well,
Is that the hardy board?
no, we don't have any hardy on. I'm going the wrong way here.
It looks like it's horizontal
That's a corrugated metal.
metal as well.
Yes.
Any thoughts to detailing, the sills and the headers of the windows with maybe a brick pattern or?
Well, possibly. I think right now what we're thinking about is a very clean sort of metal sill that would close the sill, because we have some issues with the articulation of the brick, that it makes a deep sill a little more challenging to do in brick. So we're looking at coming up with a really nice, clean sill detail that would run across. You can kind of see the indication of that in some of these window lines where we're wanting to continue the sill past the sort of the spandrel of the...
What are the elements that you just pointed at, Scott, between the windows?
These elements?
Yeah.
Those are the grills for the HVAC units.
And those are corrugated metal panels as well?
Right.
I got to tell you, I was very, very excited with the first scheme. 100%. This is like a downer. You just killed my buzz. Your next presentation, there's nothing striking about this building. Your next presentation actually looks better, and it's a parking garage from a standpoint of architecturally detailed. It just, I don't know, I'm kind of in shock a little bit, but did the room count go
No,
high?
the room count stayed the same. And I mean, to be honest with you, the hotel design has not changed tremendously from what there was previously, other than the fact that we lost that corner element. And I think that corner element was a really nice element. I mean, it added some variety, and there's probably less hotel facing Sheridan at that time than there is right now. So it created a little more articulation in the parapets and the facades.
Nothing above the first floor excites me in this building. And it, quite honestly, I don't think, at least in my opinion, it doesn't really say Bricktown or even steel yards. It's just a building that can be found anywhere. And I mean, I know there's branding with all these
Sure.
projects,
Right.
but it's just disappointing to see something like this.
Well, this is the kind of feedback we need.
Well, this would have been great as a first element, and then you bring us the next.
I want to piggyback on that, because I think I would echo Omar's comments. It feels like we saw the great thing, and it's impressive. It's not to say the design's not good, but it is a lot less.
Try to wipe that out of your heads a little bit.
Yeah, impossible. You guys did too good of a job, I think, the first time. So.
Maybe to put it differently, is now to me, the only visually striking component at this level is the gate, which is probably not what we want to have. What was so great about the previous is you activated that corner in a way that really felt alive, and so it was almost at that point you kind of are willing to say, well, the gate, we'll figure out a way to make that work, because we've really activated this hard corner and created a bunch of life. So if we're going to go away from activating that hard corner, to me, I get really uncomfortable about the gate, because I feel like now that's the only thing that people are going to really their eyes are going to be drawn to whenever they look at it.
If you want to be able to reference what we had before.
Okay. What we have going on right now is really the bar area in that corner, which is similar to what we had before. The thing we don't have is we don't have access out of that to the sidewalk area. I think that's something we have to address with the brand to see if that's even a possibility. I think they like to be able to control access to that space. One thing we could explore doing is if there's some way to secure an area outside of into the sidewalk area, either with a low fence or a low wall or something like that, where they would still have control of that space, but it could still be a part of the exterior as well. And we could talk about that.
Let me let me interject for just a moment. I'm going to hand the chair over to Omar. I need to excuse myself for the rest of the meeting. I do appreciate the presentation. I think I echo most of the comments that you've heard so far, though, as far as your information presentation.
Thank you very much.
Do I need to move? Scott, the previous one, it had a different element in the corner. It was almost a void versus what you've got now.
Right.
How can we go back to that? Personally, I like what you did with the gate and the trash enclosures. That they're not actually opening up to the street. They're in the background, and the comment about the gate being more solid than bars is great. That affects the whole line of it. My only concern there is just the pedestrians walking by the trash enclosure. But outside of that, if we're looking at trying to move the Hyatt along with that with how you've designed that trash enclosure, I'm good with it. But I do have a lot of concerns about this building.
Okay. Well, I think that's good input, and I understand where you're coming from. We're trying to respect the aesthetic of AC and respect the aesthetic of Bricktown all at the same time, and obviously we need to do a little bit more work on that. And I think there's some ways. I think one of the things that we have lost is that two-story volume on the corner, and there may be some ways to get that back. We're going to lose a couple of rooms if we do that. But that may be an option, too, to go ahead and bring that bar area to a second floor height and be able to get a little more glass on that corner. I think we just need to come back to you guys, and I think what I would propose that we do is take your comments, go back, maybe next month, be able to come back with another informational. I don't know if that's appropriate to do 2 informationals or not, but come back, see if we're a little closer, because we won't be ready to submit for our final approval by that time.
Do we need to act on the trash enclosure or anything? No?
No, I think we have some feedback from the committee if everybody's in concurrence.
Yeah, I guess I want to confirm that. Do you want to see the next presentation before you declare that court's okay? Because if you guys say, hey, yeah, we like the service court and opaque decorative gate, then we would administratively approve a revision to the Hyatt. But if you want to wait and see the final AC...
The Hyatt's waiting on us, right? They're ready.
Yeah, we would like to get approval on that court layout today.
Yeah, but if you're not ready, I just want to confirm.
What I would like to highlight is the opportunity to put art on that in some way to really make that a visually striking, where instead of trying to hide it almost, which you guys, I mean, I really like what you've done, but to actually say, hey, as you're driving down the road, you're going to see this great piece of public art.
Right.
So if there's a way to incorporate that, I would love it. I think it's a great opportunity to be able to do it and cover over something like a dumpster. So
I agree. Yeah.
But I would like for you to be able to move forward on this deal too. So I don't know if there's a way where
we don't need. You can't take action on it at this meeting. Staff just wanted to be clear, be sure we understood what you were saying.
So are we good on height?
It sounds like the consensus of the committee, as it's consisted today, is favorable to the service court concept between the two hotels, and if that's your direction, then we can move forward on that for the revision to the
I'm comfortable contingent of some kind of
Making
More
something
decorative.
special
Right.
out of that
Yes.
gate.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the only issue with that is, which hotel is the gate going to be approved with? I mean, which way is the gate sliding?
Well, one half's with one hotel, one half's with the other, in reality.
I mean, is it a swinging gate or a sliding gate? There's all kinds of questions that come along with that, but
I think from a kind of long-term, there is the possibility that although our client's intention is to own and operate both of these properties in perpetuity, there is always the possibility that they may sell one or sell both, that there may be different ownership between those two hotels someday in the future. So I think if we make the sliding gate, I'm going to suggest that if it allows us to go on with Hyatt, we make the sliding gate part of the design for AC. It belongs to AC. It probably conceptually fits better with the AC brand to have a piece of art like that as part of their project. You agree?
Well, unless that affects the Hyatt's approval, in which case we'll make the gate part of Hyatt.
I would expect that you could submit a revised plan for the Hyatt that would show this configuration for your trash enclosure and have a note on it that says the gate is subject to the design and the approval of this case.
Okay.
The case 26.
Okay. Very good.
And then I think in terms of giving you ammunition, like we talked about, for there to be approval for you guys going forward, I think that hard corner needs to be reconfigured, hopefully much more like it was before for the AC.
On the AC,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to clarify, do you guys recall just some key words or key concepts about the previous design that you really liked? Was it breaking down the scale, or was it openness, or yes, both of those? What are some?
Both of them.
Okay. Was it specifically about the material? There were really clean materials, glass and steel at the corner, and that?
The materials were fine. It's the openness, the way it addressed that corner, and the possibilities in that corner.
Okay, so if we were able to perhaps, with the proper revocables and such, have an outdoor seating that had the feeling of having kind of the mass of that previous design, might that be a good direction to go in? That
I'm not following. What do you mean by?
Well, if instead of carving a corner out of the building, if we added that kind of similar lower mass element at the corner, does that sound like it gets to the aesthetic thing that you're looking for?
Can you do that outside of the property lines?
I don't know. I don't know what we can, we can get away with, we can have a revocable permit. I'm not sure that there's enough space to do something significant there.
Yeah, we have approved outdoor seating areas with a revocable permit in the public right-of-way, but I think the committee...
Casey, I'd have to see it really to see
All right.
how the feeling and how it fits that corner really.
All righty.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Sorry for bringing the previous scheme to you.
We don't need to make any actions on this, right? Next item is item 8A2. And again, Scott, this is a presentation for the committee for informational purposes only on the parking garage at Oklahoma and Sheridan. Staff?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is a proposal we've been hearing about for quite some time, and actually we've been a little concerned about it from what we heard, but I think when we first saw the submittal, we were pleasantly surprised, and the applicant has done what we think is a pretty decent job, in fact, better than decent job of addressing the street and making the building look like it fits into the core of the district. And we're happy to have the applicant and present that to you today for your feedback. I'm not sure, maybe they can explain to you the timing of when they would formally submit. They have not submitted yet, so it looks like it's probably more like a March case that would come back to you for action at this point. And of course, that depends on whatever feedback you have for the applicant on the proposal.
Mr. Chairman, I have a potential conflict of interest on this. I know we're not voting on it today, but I will not participate in the discussion.
Understood. Thank you.
I'm Scott Dedman with ADG 920 West Main, new address. So I'm here representing Mr. Karchmer and Mr. Tolbert today, who are developing this garage. I think everybody's aware of the site. I mean, this is one of the key sites in Bricktown. It's in the very core of Bricktown along Sheridan and Oklahoma. It's adjacent to the 4 East Sheridan building. Let me go back here. We're looking at about 16,000 square feet of retail and commercial space on the ground floor. We're at about 660 parking spaces right now. There'll be 7 levels of parking, or 7 levels above grade. It's actually 1 level of retail, 6 levels of parking above grade, and then 1 level below grade, and a total of about 240,000 square feet. So a sizable project. Adjacent to the project is 4 East Sheridan. This will be on the west side. So this is the building directly west of the garage, or of the project. To the south of the project is the UCO building. And directly across the street, I just blanked on the name of this, the candy factory, yeah. And just for reference, we did just a little study on heights. This building is about 85 feet. These are some rough numbers. And then diagonal from our site is the spaghetti warehouse at about 75 feet. Directly north of the site are sort of the multiple buildings of the brewery. Currently, the public house is located there, Abuelo's Banjo Museum. So we kind of have this nice stepping of buildings across the street. Again, we're looking at the site. So we have about 140 feet to work with on this site, and the alley is very narrow in this location. So here's the ground floor footprint of the building, and we're at about 120 feet north-south on this project. The retail would take the North Bay and then wrap around slightly to the south and create a bit of a service bay in this area. So we anticipate seeing the compactor and delivery dock in this area. And some of that will be dependent upon how the retail spaces are laid out, if we have one tenant or if we have multiple tenants. The access points to the garage, the primary access point will be off of Oklahoma Avenue. We've got 3 lanes, so they'll be able to signal one of the lanes in and out. So if we're needing to get people in quickly, we'll have 2 lanes in. If we're needing to get people out quickly, we'll have 2 lanes out. There's also the parking level below in the basement area. That is accessed actually off of the alleyway. One thing I want to note is we are proposing to set the building back approximately 10 feet from the building, sort of the traditional building line of 4 East Sheridan. Part of that has to do with giving the ability to have some seating areas out front and not in that sidewalk. While on the site plan, this looks like a fairly wide sidewalk area, but with the street lamps and the plantings and everything, there's not much space there. So we felt like pulling it back would actually help the building. Also, the scale of the building is such that I think creating a little bit more setback actually helps to maybe lessen the impact of the size of the building on the street. We do have to provide a separation between these two buildings. We have windows on the east side of 4 East Sheridan, so we are providing some separation into this courtyard. And again, this is the primary entrance into 4 East Sheridan for the office spaces above. Just a typical parking layout. The one thing I'll note is that all of the ramping takes place on the alley side. So the street side is a flat floor, so we don't have any ramps that are exposed to the primary streets. Just the basement level, again, the basement level is accessed in this area, ramps down, and there's just additional parking. So it gives us the ability to have some segregated parking within that facility for either for a hotel user or something like that, to be able to have private access parking. So one of the challenges was the scale of this building. And this is really a pretty large building. So what we want to do is look at how we can break down that scale. And so we wanted to look at maybe varying heights in the facade, see how we could create some vertical articulations in the facade to break it up and more of the scale of the massing of the buildings in Bricktown. Also sort of the second floor cornice line and aligning that with the 4 East Sheridan building. So this is the conceptual elevation of that. You know, giving sort of the economies of a parking garage, there are some structural grid standards that we kind of have to live with, and fortunately they work out pretty well to give us the proportions of warehouse spaces. So we're using articulations in the brick where we're able to step the brick a little bit at different points, step back at some of these vertical points, create some reveals vertically, and start to break up some of the scale. Now, of course, the ground floor is all retail, so we have a lot of glass, a lot of storefront that open directly onto the street. Currently, we're proposing that sort of the center of the building is recessed back so that we create a small arcade to those retail spaces. The primary materials, of course, are brick, cast stone, aluminum storefront, and then what we're proposing on the openings into the garage area would be to do either a steel or aluminum powder-coated grill work that would have the resemblance of industrial window frames. We also have some glazing which would occur in the stair tower areas that would have that same look, that same fenestration, but it would be glazed. The other elevations. The west elevation faces 4 East Sheridan and would have more of the concrete framework kind of look. And then the east elevation along Oklahoma, similar to the Sheridan facade. And one thing we want to do, we don't want to duplicate all of the historic detailing that happens on the old warehouses. We want to create something of its time, but something appropriate to Bricktown. So we want to look at maybe doing some more contemporary detailing of the brick instead of the sort of the typical panels or the typical corbelling that we would see at the warehouses. Looking at some things where we're projecting bricks to create shadow lines and some things of interest in sort of the panel areas. Just some examples of what that might look like. And then just the overall images. This would be at Sheridan and Oklahoma. This is the 4 East Sheridan building, and you can kind of see the scale between the two buildings. This is where we see some of the brick patterning happening, is sort of in some of these spandrel areas. And then I think along Sheridan, we can be very successful in how we create the feel of this building, keeping the scale at a very pedestrian scale, to where the the upper floors of the parking just kind of are an extension of the building and kind of feel like they are, again, just a part of the Bricktown space. We are looking at possibly, in our 10 feet that we're proposing, creating some kind of a fenced area for seating as a possibility. I don't think we'll necessarily ask for approval for that when we get our certificate of approval. That may be something that comes as tenants take space, and whether that's necessary or not, but we wanted to see what that might look like. So I think with that, we would entertain any comments you guys might have.
Thank you, Scott. Any comments?
Yeah, my only, I have a couple, but really impressed with the design. This looks fabulous. So thank you for putting this together. My only thought has been that we have an opportunity to again activate that hard corner by the market, and that where you have the entrance into kind of where those cars are pulling into the parking garage on the current image. That street can have the feel of becoming pretty dead unless we let people know what's going on up here. And so if there's a way for either wrapping that market space and actually trying to activate both sides of that, where people can actually see, if you keep walking, this is where, this is what's awaiting you. I think that would be really helpful. And, whether there's an awning presence or not that wraps that corner or not. I know that from a scale and weight, you guys are trying to be careful, but there's opportunity there to really highlight that corner from a retail perspective. But other than that, I think I love what you guys did. So.
Great, thanks.
I echo Jonathan's comments. It's a nice building for the location. I just want to be clear on something. You're not going to come back in like 3 months and...
We're going to shorten it and, yeah.
Okay. I don't have any more comments.
If we could find a way to activate that would be awesome. But other than that,
I think that's possible.
Okay, I'm excited about it. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. Moving on, item number 8B, Administrative Approval Report. There are none. Item number C, comments from planning and department staff. None. Comments from the committee members. So the next meeting date is not at the police station. It's actually here again.